They specifically had a set amount of pumping set aside rather than to look at the possibility of how much the aquifer can produce and still remain healthy. Here are some implicit examples of the prescribed production, and I wish we could put the picture of the map up above at the same time. But in the Brazos Valley Groundwater Conservation District, there were large increases of prescribed production, anticipated production in the Bryan College Station wellfield area, and in mining areas. And again, the mining areas, that's a guess. The Post Oak Savannah Groundwater Conservation District, large increases focused on the blue water wellfield, based on permits that were granted to blue water. That's understandable. Lost Pines Groundwater Conservation District, an overall reduction in isolation of production to Bastrop County at the expense of production in Lee County. There's definitely a prediction of most of the pumping within that district coming from Bastrop County based on the DFC model run. Mid-East Texas Groundwater Conservation District, increased production primarily on existing production scenarios. How should GAMs be used? And this is again something that needs to be addressed on a statewide basis. The Texas Water Development Board needs to address this better. The mission statements in GAMs of the GAM is to ensure the adequacy of supplies or inadequacy of supplies throughout the 50-year planning horizon. This is on the website. The purpose of the GAM, to provide a tool for making predictions of groundwater availability. How much water can be safely produced? Not how can we limit water. GMA 12's DFC calculation method misuses the tool, the model, and the program itself. Can these DFCs be measured? This slide shows from the Texas Water Development Board database, and we understand that districts are putting together monitoring programs. I believe that there are a few wells in some districts that are being monitored. But in the Texas Water, these wells were the wells that the GAM is based on. The calibration of the GAM is based on these wells, or wells like this, not many more, if any. There are 25 wells in the Texas Water Development Board website with water level measurements made since 2000. 25 wells out of 5,000 square miles. Okay. 53, that's in the Corrizo Aquifer. In the Simsboro Aquifer, 53 wells. 53 wells in the Simsboro that have measurements collected since the year 2000, which is the calibration year, I guess, of the GAM.
The year the DFCs are based on.
Pardon?
The year the DFC.
The year the DFC is based on. Excuse me. The DFC is based on 2000 measurements, year 2000 measurements. 53 wells in the Simsboro in almost 6,800 square miles. Okay. One thing of note. Going back here. Here we go. In some of these areas that are being looked at for large production, in both aquifers, there are no available monitoring wells. None. And look at this. Mid-East Texas Groundwater Conservation District has a DFC based on average drawdown across its whole district. There's one well. One monitoring well. How do you measure that? How do you measure it and come up with a good network of monitoring wells with that? So, only 17 of the wells in the Corrizo Aquifer had a water level measurement in 2000. Many of those wells are pumping wells, which are not good monitoring wells unless it's done very properly. So there needs to be, there will have to be a properly placed monitoring well network with accurate and reliable and sufficient monitoring and the existing wells cannot provide a good enough monitoring network. So there's going to be a huge cost to districts associated with establishing, and time associated with establishing that, if it's even possible, and we'll get to that in a minute. So there's one, in the Simsboro, there's one well for every 300 square miles. Let's go this one. You cannot correlate the observation well measurements to the GAM predictions. The models, and this is stated in the model, models are not capable of predicting aquifer responses at specific points, such as a particular well. That's straight from the GAM. The models are not capable of predicting aquifer responses at specific points, such as a well. The reported transient calibration error is more than 30 feet for both the Corrizo and the Simsboro aquifer. What that means is the predicted water level in the model may be 30 feet off one way or the other, right?
On average.
On average. So it may be more in some places and less in others, but on average it may be off by 30 feet. How much difference does it make in an aquifer if you lower the water level 30 feet or not? In this aquifer that we're talking about, a lot of water. So 30 feet could be the difference in pumping tens of thousands of acre feet more or less. And that's the accuracy of the model. That's the tool that's being used. That's unacceptable. It should not be used that way. The predictions of the GAM cannot be applied to the few wells that do exist. The GAM was designed to be used for estimating regional availability, not predicting specific water declines. Only by using specific declines can the DFC be physically monitored. By calculating the DFC using the GAM, the tool is clearly being used beyond its design as described by the authors and approved by the Texas Water Development Board. So we have a problem, we have a conundrum, a pickle. The misuse of the tool, or even the use of the tool to calculate a specific target value that cannot be physically measured, and even if it can be measured, the physical measurements cannot be accurately or properly correlated back to the tool. It's just not made for this. And so we are setting limits, we're drawing lines in the sand that cannot be verified and validated. Again, this is not just a GMA 12 problem. It's not any one district problem. This is across the state of Texas. We've seen it misused in some egregious ways on a district level, a sub-district level, a GMA level. The models are being misused because they're not created. They're not created to be used on a well-by-well basis. How do we do this? There we go. Man. Here we go. All right, conclusions. The calculated DFCs do not reflect the amount of groundwater available in the Simsboro aquifer. The Simsboro aquifer is a prolific, or the Corrizo aquifer for that matter, both aquifers. These aquifers are prolific. They store huge amounts of water. They are deep and thick and very productive. And the DFC calculations do not reflect that availability. In fact, well, I'll get to that in a minute. The calculated DFCs do not reflect accurately the aquifer hydraulics. As we stated, as we've looked at the GAM in areas that we've worked across Central Texas and other GAMs across Central Texas in these aquifers, while certain parameters like hydraulic conductivity, which is permeability, or the transmissivity, which is the permeability times the thickness, those attributes are reasonably accurate in some places and not so accurate in other places. In fact, I believe that in Post Oak, the transmissivities were considerably higher in real life near Blue Water's test well than they were in the model. But in areas that we've studied specifically, they're pretty reasonable. Earlier, Ms. Reese talked about how the only testing done in the deep part of the Simsboro Aquifer in Lee County was ignored by this GMA in its process. We drilled a deep Simsboro well, NDOT drilled a deep Simsboro well, large capacity. We pumped it at 2,300 gallons a minute for 20 days and tested it. Measured water levels in the only other deep wells nearby, which were wells that NDOT drilled for monitoring. And the testing results from those from that aquifer test showed that the storage coefficients in the model are too low in that area, which is a pretty good sized area, and that the faults, while we need more information, on the faults, but in that area, this drawdown would have intersected the faults, and the faults are not nearly as restricted to flow as modeled. So that's the only evidence available in that part of Lee County. And that information was not considered in this process. Also, the DFCs are based on a preset or a prescribed amount of pumping based on what districts wanted rather than the availability of water in the aquifer. And it was not tied directly to the measure of the health of the aquifer. I don't know of any model runs done by this GMA, for example, that incorporated, that took out the restricted flow across the faults to see what that would do to the DFCs. It was never presented that I know of. Now, what are the ramifications of this? Oh, that's the wrong way. Here we go. What this DFC process and what this GMA has done has created a false water shortage. It created a paper water shortage. In fact, we see quotes in the paper, as Ms. Reese has said, that we're out of water. We can't permit any more water. That's not based on the availability of water in the aquifer. It's based on a preset limit, based on this reverse engineered process. This severely hampers, incapacitates, hurts the water planning efforts in Texas. As you know, there's a drought. There's a lot of water need. There are needs of this water in areas. A lot of this water is not needed in the area that it is. It's needed in other areas. And we can't plan. We can't plan on projects. We can't get water to other areas that need water with this process like it is. It restricts economic development, as Ms. Reese talked about, and as she pointed out. It impinges on landowners' right. The water shortage is only on paper. There are millions of acre-feet of water in storage. It's a replenishable resource, and in fact, the GAM shows that even with a lot more pumping than is modeled in the DFC runs, and it shows on a regional basis, with a lot more pumping and significant amount of more drawdown, the aquifer will remain full. So it's a false water shortage. The model was designed to estimate availability and not to regulate. Then there are supplies for many years. In fact, there are supplies available for longer than our country has been in existence. However, we can't use them because of this DFC process.